Twin Lakes Park was a beautiful place to camp out for the night and to bike around the next morning. What's more, the park ranger there suggested I make a stop at Sailor's Creek on my way to the Appomattox courthouse. Why not? I figured. It wasn't too far out of the way. I continued the drive I'd been doing since leaving the crater yesterday, which roughly resembled the course Robert E. Lee had taken after withdrawing the Army of Northern Virginia from the trenches they'd wallowed in for months, once the triumphant Union strike at the Battle of Five Forks on April 1st, 1865, rendered the defense of Petersburg hopeless. Lee's goal was to move his forces westward and reunite with the Army of Tennessee, led by General Joseph Johnston. General Ulysses S. Grant was in hot pursuit, though, determined to make sure that would never happen. Grant's forces caught up with their rivals alongside a stream called Sailor's Creek near Farmsville, Virginia on April 6th. The Confederacy would be dealt its final blow in the ensuing battle, and over 7,000 soldiers surrendered without a fight, given how clear it was by then that the war had been lost. This is the largest taking of prisoners in any one day of the Civil War. The Visitor Center conveyed the story of this battle very thoroughly, with many weapons on display and maps detailing both sides' advancements. The nearby Hillman House made for an interesting visit as well. Much of the violence of Sailor's Creek was concentrated around this house, and it would later serve as a federal hospital, treating over 500 patients combined from both sides. There were even 150-year-old bloodstains on the floor reflecting this grisly scene. It took me another 40 minutes to drive to the Appomattox courthouse from there. It was crazy to imagine Lee's troops covering the same distance on foot in just 3 days, given how physically and spiritually depraved they must have been at that point. But before long, I reached the spot where the Confederates famously decided that the game was over. Although the courthouse is only one of many buildings in this village, and not the one where any acts of surrender took place, the entire settlement wound up being named after its most conspicuous feature. I visited the general store, tavern, and county jail, then enjoyed a presentation by a park ranger who explained the significance of this site. Prior to the Civil War, Appomattox had been a typical farm town with about 9,000 residents, over half of whom were enslaved and living in quarters by the fields in which they worked throughout the day. Many of them never laid eyes on anywhere else in the world but here. The ranger then explained how Appomattox had become a household name. On April 9, 1865, General Lee found himself in a truly hopeless situation out in this remote region. His Army of Northern Virginia, once 90,000 strong, now numbered barely 20,000, and they were terribly undersupplied and malnourished. Meanwhile, Grant's forces were 5 times as numerous and had Lee's troops completely surrounded. The general now reached his famous conclusion. The politically neutral courthouse grounds nearby were chosen as the site of surrender. The building where it occurred was called the McLean House, named after its owner, wholesale grocer Wilmer McLean. The original house had been dismantled in 1893, but it was rebuilt in the 1940s using the original plans of the old building on exactly the same spot as it had once stood. As I approached this newer McLean house, I was immediately reminded of one of the last scenes in the movie Lincoln. In an otherwise dialogue-driven film, this wordless scene at Appomattox thrives on powerful silence. The movie set is reconstructed in astonishing accuracy to the building I was now standing in front of. Inside and to the left is the room where Lee sat down to sign the terms of unconditional surrender dictated by Grant, with Abraham Lincoln's son Robert notably in attendance. They really conjured this scene up well, even arranging the replicated furniture so that the marble table where Lee signed the paper is facing the wooden desk where Grant sat, looking on. Outside of the main park grounds was a cemetery for the Confederate victims of the Battle of Appomattox, as well as the Appomattox branch of the Museum of the Confederacy. One of the standout features of this museum was the uniform and sword that Lee wore as he made his way into McLean House to confront Grant, who let his opponent head home freely, while also making him vow to dissolve his army and recognize the federal government as legitimate. Thus concluded an extraordinary visit, for sure one of the most powerful one-day history lessons I'd ever had. Now it's time to move from the sight of Robert E. Lee at his lowest to that of him at his most audacious, when he led his troops in an invasion of the North, hoping to shatter his opponent's morale and see the Confederacy proudly established.